Jon Venables, the killer of Jamie Bulger all those years ago. There were two of them. Of course, his accomplice was Robert Thompson. Now, both of these people were... Mike seems to be swirling around there. I'm
trying to get a better signal for you, Kevin. That's what I'm trying to get.
Good. So, Robert Thompson, they were both granted anonymity, and Robert Thompson seems to have sort of sorted his life out. We've never heard of him since. Jon Venables, no such story. The guy's been in and out of jail, is currently in jail for possessing more than 1,000 serious pornographic images of children, so he is a dangerous paedophile. He's getting a parole board hearing, 2-day hearing in November. As I say, keep saying, I'm not necessarily against that. It's every prisoner's right to get a chance of parole. What I don't trust is the parole board to make the right decision, because they have a history of letting very dangerous people out onto the streets. They must surely not even think about letting Jon Venables back onto the streets, unleashing him onto an unsuspecting public. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. You would hope that they would just keep him inside forever, because he's a very dangerous man. He's obviously a risk to children. It's his last throw of the dice, though, before this new Victim and Prisoners Act comes out, where the rules will change. And so the only consideration in the future will be the safety and welfare of the public. At the moment, they have to consider the prisoners' rights, and that's a big problem. And as you say, there's often left-leaning liberal types on these parole boards who are too concerned with the Venables and not the people he's had done awful things to throughout his life.
As I understand it, the parole board's remit is just this: to consider, if they release anyone, Jon Venables, for example, whether or not that person will be a danger to the public. That's the only thing they consider. They don't consider the offence. And that might be a problem, because, to be honest with you, if they were allowed to consider what Jon Venables did all those years ago, OK, he was only 10 at the time, and then consider his subsequent offences, massive rape punch-up in 2008, and then clearly a dangerous practising paedophile. So that's what he's in jail for at the moment. If they were to consider those offences, then he shouldn't stand a chance in hell of getting out. But because they're only allowed to consider whether or not he would be dangerous, they might, well, knowing them, make the wrong decision.
This is exactly the case. This is the worry with the parole board hearings, like we've seen with John Warboys. If they do say he's got parole, though, the Secretary of State can appeal straight away. So an appeal process exists. And I imagine the Secretary of State will not want, politically, Venables to be released on his watch. And so I imagine it'll be a lengthy process. Even if they grant him parole, he won't be released for a long time. But the thing is, how do they control a paedophile? You can't. He's going to have a mobile phone. He can access the internet wherever he is. How could you control that? The only place Venables should be is in a cell, locked away, so he can't harm people.
Yeah, and don't forget, the thing about the government and the Justice Secretary being able to appeal a parole board decision is they did just that in the case of Colin Pitchfork, who murdered and raped two 15-year-old schoolgirls while his own kid was in the back of his car. They let him, and the appeal by the government failed, and he was let out, only to be found a couple of weeks later hanging around outside a girls' school and returned to jail. I don't think there was any kind of appeal about Gary Glitter, but the parole board let him out, incredibly, in my mind. He was sentenced, quite rightly, to 16 years, probably should have got longer, for vile paedophile offences. This man has abused children all his life. They let him out after 8 years. So the government being able to appeal does not necessarily, or does not mostly, succeed in keeping these people behind bars. I think we need to reform this entire system. As you said, the Victims and Offenders Act may do that.
Yeah, absolutely. This new act will have an effect on that, so it will be a lot better, I think. But we just we can't trust the parole board are part of the blob that controls the country, this left-leaning establishment, and they will put all the thoughts onto Venables and see him as a victim of society,
Yes.
regrettably, rather than being an evil paedophile who will just cause misery, because every one of those children he observes in those videos or images have been physically and sexually abused, and it will traumatise them for the rest of their lives. So perhaps they should take that into account.
And also, here's one factor that I find infuriating, is that when they say, oh, well, we have to let these people out because our prisons are so overcrowded. I believe they're building maybe 2 or 3 more, but they're not completed yet. I mean, we need, as a matter of urgency, to build more and more prisons and open and get them going, because no government likes to admit they're having to build prisons, because they like to say we've got a handle on crime, we're stopping crime, we're busting crime. So we need to build quite a few more prisons so that the parole board cannot trot out the lame excuse our prisons are overcrowded. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely, because we see the Home Secretary telling people to arrest every shoplifter. At the current moment, there's only about 500-600 spare places in prisons. And so where are they all going to go? We've got to arrest prolific criminals. The police are only solving 5% of crime. If they start to solve 6, 7, 10% of crime, where are those people going to go? Because I've spoken to criminals. It was one of my jobs to speak to criminals, to get information out of them. And one of the things that was made clear to me is the only thing they fear is going to jail. They laugh at community sentences. So when people claim that tags and cleaning up a canal or whatever is some kind of punishment, it isn't at all. The only thing they fear is their liberty being taken away, and taken away for substantial periods. So I'm absolutely with you. I'd have it like the Dirty Dozen film, where they had to build their own prison and then they could sleep in it when it was done. But something needs to be. We need more prison places.
Good idea, that. Yeah,
wants to crack down.
Now you're talking. Good idea, that, Mike.
Yeah.
Listen, great to talk to you as always. Safe home. Glad you had a happy honeymoon.